my cup of tea.
No, I can understand. I mean,
Yeah.
what you do for us,
For you, that means a lot. Last year, is she okay? Oh, okay. No, I get it. Well, you appreciate it. That's what I like. Thank you. Because you know how much work it is. Especially on umbrella. Where do you want this? Where do you keep it? I don't know. Okay. Oh, yeah, duh.
You should know, she sings around town. And she's amazing. walked out with it. So it was real fun. If you want to bring anybody with you, bring someone. It doesn't have to be hard. And I just kind of like hard no. Yeah, I know. And I did the same thing in college. Now, I know somebody and they asked me out because they want to buy me. And it works.
Before we get started, I just want to say one thing about the mics. I'll pass them out, and I can control them from here. If you just show me that you have hand 1 or hand 2, and then I'll control the volume on them with the iPad, okay? It says 1 in green. It's right underneath the microphone, and it says hand 2 in green right below the mic. Thank you.
Good morning. I think most of you are with us for worship this morning, but for those of you who are not, a warm welcome for joining us. Pastor Colby Martin, who is sneaking in front of me here, is here to talk about why queer affirming Christianity makes sense, and we want to give him a warm welcome, and so Colby, welcome.
Y'all stuck around? You're gluttons for punishment. This is beautiful. Okay, I need just a moment here to pull up my notes because I had a quick change of heart on, yeah, I'm not affirming anymore, so. It's gonna get weird. No, not a chance, not a chance. Could you imagine? Oh, what a disappointment. All right. Just pulling up my most recent version. Because what I decided to do is I want to allow more time for a talk back, for Q&R. I call it Q&R. Question and response, because I may not have an answer for everything, but I'll respond. So we'll do like a modified version of this once the internet loads for me. And I'm going to grab my water bottle. Okay, how about that song from Ron and Greg, though? Yeah! That was just... what a treat. The whole choir, the whole service, all of it was really, what the... I don't know if everybody heard that. She said, no, I'm just kidding. So, just want to make sure the whole room caught that. Okay. Sorry, I was having so much fun chatting with y'all in the lobby that I didn't really pull my notes up in time, so... but I don't really need them. I use them as a kind of safety net, like a...
Dumbo's magic feather.
Yeah, thank you. It's that, Dumbo's magic feather. I don't really need it, but I think I need it. By show of hands, who had we're going to go either blankie or stuffed animal growing up. So who are my blankie people? Show of hand, okay. And then who are my stuffed animal people? Yeah, I was a stuffed animal as well, so... I had a bear named Brownie, and I think I named him Brownie because he was the color brown. And that is about as creative as small children get with their naming of their animals. All right. What I'd like to do with you is share a bit of my story with you, of how it is that I got to here in Dillon, Colorado on August 24th, 2025. And then that will set up this premise that I have, which is that being affirming of LGBTQ people, for me, is not an oxymoron with being a follower of Jesus. In fact, these things just makes sense to me. To be a follower of Jesus, as I hope to show, the logical conclusion of that is that one would be affirming of those who identify as LGBTQ. So we'll get there in a minute. Let me back up and start with a bit of me and my story and how it is that I got here. And in order to frame that, what I want to do is I actually want to go back to the year 1755. Some of you remember? But in 1755, one of the most devastating earthquakes to ever happen on the planet happened in Lisbon, Portugal. Now, they didn't have Richter scales back then, obviously, but if they did, best estimates are this would have been like a 9.0 on the Richter scale. And this completely obliterated Lisbon, Portugal on November 1st of 1755. Some 100,000 lives were lost. The whole city was completely leveled. And I remember studying about this years ago and learning that as a result of the city being completely obliterated by the earthquake, it led to 4 innovations in the fields of philosophy, religion, science, and sociology, all of which probably would not have happened or would not have happened on that timeline had it not been for the devastating earthquake. And so briefly, the new infrastructure, the innovations were, number one, they had to ask, how do we want to rebuild this city? So this led to a new kind of infrastructure. And actually, the rebuild of Lisbon, Portugal, is where we first began to see the modern-day grid patterns of cities, which now most cities seem to have this grid pattern. It was formed by the Marquis of Pombal, who helped to redesign how do we want to rebuild Portugal after this earthquake. So it led to new infrastructure. They started to build buildings. Okay, can we build structures in such a way to where if this happens again, it won't be as devastating? It also led to a new awareness of causality, which is to say, how did this happen? And this was really the first time in history where people began to ask questions, what causes earthquakes? Where does something like this come from? How did we get here? And they started asking questions like, were the animals acting funny beforehand? Did the sea level rise around the time of the earthquake? Did buildings fall in a certain direction? So they were trying to get curious about, how did this thing happen? The third innovation was a new way to think about God. Because prior to the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, it was assumed, there was this saying that goes like this, what is right. And what that means is whatever happens must be right, because God was seen as the great chess mover of all things, and so if something happened, it must be right, because God did it. And then this earthquake that completely devastates 100,000 people's lives and takes out a whole city, suddenly they began asking new questions around, wait, did God really do that? Is that really, are we really going to continue to think about God in this way? And so this challenged how people thought about God. There were those, this is going to surprise you, but around that time, the Catholic Church blamed the earthquake on the Protestants. And the Protestants blamed the earthquake on the Catholics. Yeah, so isn't that great? We've come a long way since then. And then my favorite detail is this, is that of the entire city of Lisbon, there was one portion of town that was relatively unfazed by the earthquake, and it was the Alma district, which is essentially the red light district of Lisbon, Portugal. I know, isn't that great? It'd be like if a tsunami wipes out America but just leaves Las Vegas shining. Like, I don't know. What does that say about our view of God? And then the fourth innovation was about language. How do we talk now? Because prior to that earthquake, it was fairly common to use the ground as a metaphor when you wanted to talk about something that was immovable, secure, could not be shaken. And then suddenly the earth moves in such a way that completely obliterates a major city, and we have to update our language in response to this. Okay, so why do I start with the Lisbon earthquake of 1755? Because I think in many ways, this for me is kind of a parallel experience of what I've come to call a faithquake, which is essentially what can happen sometimes in people's lives, and this has certainly happened in mine, and I know some of your stories as well, what's happened in yours, where what you used to believe has been obliterated by a series of things. Could be relationships that you now have. It could be books that you've read. It could just be life experience. And so when I think about these four innovations, I kind of map them on to a faithquake. And I think similar to a faithquake, when beliefs that you used to hold dear no longer make sense anymore, or structures that you used to rely upon now they're questionable, or leaders that you used to put your faith in have let you down in some significant way. And so I think also when it comes to a faithquake, we also look for, when we start to rebuild, we need a new infrastructure, which is to say, how do we want to rebuild, if we want to rebuild, how do we want to rebuild a kind of faith? Can we build our spiritual lives in such a way that may not be as susceptible to future faithquakes? Because life continues to unfold, and we're always growing and changing. Can we have a spiritual life that is less open to being completely devastated should we change our beliefs again on something? It also faithquakes lead to a new awareness, which is to say, asking questions of how did this happen? Similar to how the earthquake caused people to say, how did that happen? I think a lot of us that have experienced a kind of faithquake, we ask, what happened to the Christianity that I once knew and loved? How did we get here? And by here, what do I mean? I don't know that I need to unpack that as much, because I think there's a sense in which what it means to be Christian in our country today at a sort of a popular, widespread level, for many of us is not compatible with the Sunday school teachers that loved on us when we were young kids. It's not compatible with the songs that we sang and what our understanding of Jesus was. Like, how did we get here? Where so much of what passes for Christianity seems to be depressingly absent of Jesus, I guess is how I'll say it. How did this happen? We also, faithquakes lead us to new ideas about God. And I talked about that in the sermon this morning if you were here. Like, we now have I don't know if I want to believe in a God who just punishes people if they don't do the right thing. So many of us have had to let go of this idea that God only loves a certain portion of humanity. That God only loves, or maybe God favors people with certain skin color, or that God only loves people whose sexual orientation is a certain way, or that God only really loves people who have a certain kind of belief structure. We've had to renegotiate some of our ideas about God. And then when it comes to the language, oftentimes on the other side of our faithquake, we also need to upgrade how we talk, or update how we talk. We need new metaphors. We need new ways to talk about God. For many of us, or I'll say for me, words like saved and sin have required new kinds of definitions on the other side of my faithquake. I've had to update my language. In fact, I know that y'all went through, as a church, you went through my book on Clobber recently. And if you read the afterword, one of the things, because the current version that's out is the second revised edition of Unclobber. And one of the things I wrote in the afterword, one of the things that's different in the second edition is that shortly after the first edition was published, there was a Sunday at our church where after sermon one day I was approached by a friend of mine named Xander, and Xander is a transgender intersex man, and I know Kate will relate to this, but pastors love when you walk up to us after church and be like, oh, can I ask you a question? It's like, Yes, now is the exact right time for this conversation. Sure, what do you have to say? No, and Xander was great because I love Xander, and he said, hey, I just wanted to offer some feedback. And Xander said, you often will say in your sermons or in your prayers, you will talk about the sons and daughters of God. Or you'll say things like brothers and sisters. And Xander said, I just want you to know that I don't really hear myself in that language. And it's a simple change if you wanted to just, instead of saying sons and daughters of God, if you just change it to children of God, suddenly everybody feels like, oh, I'm a part of that. And instead of brothers and sisters in Christ, like siblings in Christ. And so that was a moment. So when I wrote, then I was able to go back through for the second edition of Unclobber and do, Command F, find all instances of sons and daughters, and just change it to children. It was real easy. But this is kind of what happens on the other side of a faith quake. We've got to update our language sometimes. Okay, so let me then give you a brief window into the faith quake that really got me to be with you right here today. So I was born and raised into a family where my dad comes from a long line of Baptists and Mennonites. In fact, I often say, hi, my name is Colby, and I'm a recovering Baptist. So this is how I was raised. And my mom and dad took me and my brothers to church, 47 times a week, whatever, just the standard church-going family. And that was our lives. And church was just a part of what it meant to be a Martin, to be in our family. And that fractured a little bit when my parents got a divorce sometime around my age of 8, 9, or 10. It was kind of long, protracted, messy. But when my parents divorced, my mom kept my brothers and me going to Baptist church for a while. But in the 90s, I don't know that the Baptists had really figured out how to handle a divorced family very well, especially when the mom and dad previously had been pretty involved in the church, and now it was just messy and weird, and my mom, I think, just wanted a fresh start, and that makes sense. So we left the Baptist world and found just a generic evangelical Bible church in our town, and that was where we continued going to church. But for me, it was just something that I did. It wasn't really, didn't have a lot of meaning into my life, in my life. All that changed the summer 1999 as I was getting ready for my senior year of high school. And we went on a trip from our youth group up in Oregon down to Southern California, where we would spend a week at a conference called SEMP, S-E-M-P. Stands for Students Equipped to Minister to Peers. Because if Christians love anything, we love acronyms. Like we're just gonna, it's us and the federal government, we will acronym everything. And the goal of SEMP was this. High schoolers would come from all around the country, and in the morning they would train you in apologetics. And if you don't know what that term is, apologetics is just a fancy way of saying how to prove that you're right and they're wrong, but wrap it up in like religious words. And so they would train us in apologetics in the morning, how to defend our faith. And because this was largely a Baptist world, if you're not familiar with the world of Baptists, here's how it works. A person is saved when they say the sinner's prayer. And if you don't know what the sinner's prayer is, it's some version of confessing to God that you are a sinner and that you know that you deserve hell, but thankfully you believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, and you invite him into your heart, and then you're good. Like that's really the thinking. That's really about all it is. So they would train us in the morning how to talk to people, how to do like random street witnessing, and then in the afternoon they would send us out into the beaches of Huntington Beach in Southern California. They'd send us out 2 by 2, because that's biblical, and we would go and we would street witness the people. And if you don't know what that is, it's about as weird as it sounds. Like we would walk up to people, like families would fly from across the country. They'd come from, Missouri. They'd come from Ohio. They'd come from, I don't know if people from Colorado are coming to Huntington Beach, because you're good here. But when you live in Nebraska, like you want to kind of see something interesting. So they're coming all over the country to Huntington Beach, setting up their blankets and their umbrellas. And then you get this punk, precocious 17-year-old kid walking up, and here, I kid you not, here's how they trained us to do this. We would walk up and we'd say, "Excuse me, ma'am, can I ask you a question?" Now, you should say no at this point. pull the ripcord, get out of this conversation. Like, it's okay, kid, keep going. But you're kind, and so you say, sure. Now here's my question. I say, if you were to die right now, do you know where you would go? How brilliant is this? I mean, sign me up for your multi-level marketing scheme, because I could sell. Like, if you were to die right now, and then the idea is that we would, we would try to get them to a position where they would say the sinner's prayer with us, and then I saved your soul. And then I would move on to the next person. Okay. Now, I get back the first afternoon of trying to save souls. I'm going to be honest with you. I had a 0% success rate that first afternoon. 0 souls were saved. Yeah, shocking. And I get back to the room that I'm staying at, our accommodations there. And I lay down on my bed. I'm all alone. The guy I'm rooming with isn't in there at the moment. And I lay down on the bed, and I just start weeping. Which now in my life isn't that big of a deal. I'm kind of an easy cry now, but as a 17-year-old kid, I don't know that I had even cried to that point, which is a weird thing to say, but it might be true. I'm just sobbing. I'm just soaking my pillowcase with snot and tears. And in that moment, I heard God, no, not in an audible voice, but in the way that you kind of just, you feel like someone's talking to you. I heard God say, Colby, you get to make a choice right now. God said, you can keep going down the path that you're on if you want. And I knew what God meant by that, which is to say, you can keep living your life. It's really where it's kind of all about you. Because at that point in my life, all I was really concerned about was being cool, being popular, just your typical, not typical, I don't want to, like there's some really, really emotionally secure, grounded, intelligent teenagers. I was not one of them. So I was really self-absorbed. And God said, you can keep going down that path if you want. It's up to you. I ain't going to force you. And God does use words like ain't. It's really refreshing. I ain't going to force you. And God said, or you can use this opportunity to go in a different direction. And this really is what the biblical term repentance means, to have a change of mind that sets you on a different path. God says you can go in a different direction where your life becomes about something other than you, something more, something greater. Me, God said. And in that moment, I knew that second path was the path that I wanted to take. And it took me years and years to finally figure out what happened in that moment. Why was I so broken? Why was I crying after spending an afternoon on Huntington Beach trying to save people's souls? Why was I crying? And I realized years later with the spiritual director, it's because I was completely fractured in that moment. Which is to say, I was out there telling people how to have a relationship with God through Jesus when I had no concept of it myself. I was basically exposed as a fraud, if you will. And being exposed as a fraud, it broke me. Like I couldn't sustain that pretend mask that I had been wearing. And so for the rest of the week, I had this newfound excitement and enthusiasm. Like, what does this look like to be on a path to have my life be about God? And at the end of the week, there was a service where I felt this call by God to be a pastor. I felt God saying, I'd love for you to take this one step further and actually make your life about serving people through ministry. And so I changed my plans to go to Rochester Institute of Technology to study graphic design, and instead enrolled in a Bible college to study to become a pastor. Not the best economic decision I could have made for my life, I'm going to be honest with you. But I knew in that moment that this is what God was calling me to do, and I said yes. And so I graduated high school, I go to Bible college, and at this point, I'm excelling in the world of evangelical Christianity. Like I'm doing really well at it. I've got a particular skill set of being able to read the Bible, study the Bible, interpret it in its language, communicate it. Like I'm doing well, and things are going well for me in that. And my first job out of college, working at a church in Salem, Oregon, I was in the process of becoming licensed in the denomination as a licensed pastor. And one afternoon, I'm on my lunch break, and I had one final hurdle to cross before becoming licensed. And the final hurdle was to sit with a panel of seasoned ministers to be interviewed with some of the distinctives of the denomination, which was the Christian Missionary Alliance. And I can remember on a lunch break reading through the policies and procedures manual for the Christian Missionary Alliance. Just a fascinating read. If you're ever struggling to sleep one night, just download the policies manual for any denomination, really. And I'm reading the policies and procedures manual on my lunch break in the church lobby, and I'll never forget this moment. There's a portion in the manual that says this. It says, practicing homosexuals cannot be members of the church. I remember stopping just dead in my tracks and reading, practicing homosexuals. But what if they're like really good at it? I'm kidding. That wasn't my thought. I remember thinking, okay, sure, I get it. My head knew the right answer. I knew that being gay was a sin and not God's design and all that. But for the first time, I was being confronted with the practical outworkings of that theology, which is to deny membership in a church. And I kept reading, and it outlined all the ways that, again, practicing homosexuals couldn't serve in the church. Like, they could be greeters out front, they could serve in the parking lot, but they couldn't serve in children's ministry. They certainly couldn't be pastors or elders. They could give of their tithes and offerings. Oh, how gracious of them. And in this moment, I realized I was experiencing another fracturing, another disintegration, where my head was in one place, theologically anchored in this historical conservative position, but my heart suddenly was in an entirely different place. Like, but wait, why is this how we treat people? And I wish I could tell you that I in that moment of disintegration, I set about to align my head and my heart, but that wasn't my story. I just noticed it. Like, oh man, I've never really thought about this before. At that point, I didn't know any gay people. I didn't have any gay family members. It just was something I just sort of took the party line on. The Bible seemed clear and obvious. You ever heard that? The Bible's clear. Anytime someone says the Bible is clear, the subtext is, I haven't really read it. Bible's not clear. Bible's not clear. So I kind of just store away that disconnect between the head and my heart. I get licensed barely just by the skin of my teeth. I eventually moved from Salem, Oregon, and we moved down to, at that point it was my wife and two of our kids. We moved down to Phoenix, Arizona, where I joined the staff of a large evangelical megachurch. Don't recommend either the evangelical megachurch or Phoenix, Arizona, if I'm being honest. But moved there, and I continued a process that I had begun shortly after college, a process that I like to describe as auditing my beliefs. So I was born and raised in the Baptist world, trained in the evangelical world, got my degree at a Baptist college, and shortly after that, I began to read books that would not have been approved by my Baptist professors. And what these books did is they began to expose to me the way in which the diversity of Christian thought for 2,000 years, like people have been studying these topics for 2,000 years and come to all different kinds of conclusions. They haven't agreed. I don't know if you know this about Baptists, but Baptists, they think it goes like this. There's Jesus, then there's Peter, then there's Paul, then skip all this other stuff, and there's Baptists. Like this pure, undiluted strain of truth. And so I'm reading all these other books, and I'm realizing, wait, like, there are other ways to think about some of these things. And so I describe this often as like you know the game Jenga? Yeah, that game you play once with your grandkids, and you're like, okay, we're not doing that again. Like, the blocks go everywhere. I'm like, let's move on to something else. The ROI on that game is very small. But in Jenga, you take out these blocks, and then the goal is to put them back on the tower, but you gotta like turn them and twist them and put them back on. But I think sometimes when you go through this process of auditing your beliefs, you take out some of these ideas that have been handed to you from preachers in the past, or from family members, or from professors in college, or whatever it is, and you pull out these blocks, and you're like, this is something I've always thought was true, but how do I really want to think about it right now? And we get curious about it. We turn it around, we investigate it, we ask questions of it, and sometimes we think to ourselves, this still makes sense. This still works. And we add it to our tower, but maybe we adjust it a little bit, but we hold on to it. Other times, we've got these blocks and then we're like, I cannot in good conscience believe this anymore. And we toss the block away. Like that just does not fit anymore in my structure of belief. And then other times, we're not really sure. So we just kind of set the block on the counter. Like maybe I'll come back to it later. And for me, the topic of homosexuality in the Bible was one of those where I kind of set it on the counter. Like one day I may need to get more curious about that. And that day came sometime in the year 2009, 2010. And to this day, I can't really remember what the point was, but there was something in my life that finally compelled me to revisit that moment in the church lobby several years prior. To go back and say, okay, I need to align these. I can't keep living out of alignment. This isn't working for me. And so what I did is I gave myself permission, which, by the way, is a very powerful thing, to give yourself permission to do something. I gave myself permission to explore the topic of homosexuality in the Bible, really for the first time. And so I gave, maybe it was 9 months, a year, I don't know, it was a concentrated time of study of looking into what are often called the clobber passages. These are the 6 verses or 6 passages in the Bible that historically have been used, I would argue misused, to justify the discrimination against those who identify as LGBTQ. And I took all of the tools of my training of evangelical Baptist theology, like how to exegete the passage, how to put it in its historical context, how to study the original language, how to use other passages in Scripture that are more clear to help interpret the less clear ones, and all of that. And on the other side, spoiler alert, on the other side of my study, I concluded, we've gotten this topic wrong. The Bible does not say what we've always been told that it says on this topic. And again, I wish I could tell you that in that moment, I stood up at my church the next Sunday and said, hey, I've got a new way of thinking about things. But I didn't. I kept it to myself, in large part because I was working at a church in which I had a sneaky suspicion where if my church knew how I thought about it, it might not go well for me. And I was the sole breadwinner for our family at that point of 3 kids. Had mortgage to pay and college loans to pay off and all the things. And I'm like, man, I don't know what to do with this. In the book, if you read the book, I mentioned the Naaman effect. So in 2 Kings chapter 5, there's a story of a guy named Naaman who was a servant of some non-Israelite, some Gentile nation, and Naaman had a skin disease, and he heard about this prophet Elisha, and so Naaman goes and gets healed by Elisha, and Naaman has this experience of like, oh, I realize now that your God is the one true God. It's a kind of conversion experience for Naaman. And then Naaman has this moment of crisis where he realizes, oh no, if I go back to my home area, inevitably there'll be a time where my king, my Lord, will require me to worship and serve our old God. And so Naaman goes to Elisha and says, what do I do? What do I do with this newfound conviction that's in my heart, but my external world really depends on me not believing this? And Elisha says, well, Naaman, if you want to be faithful and honor God, then you need to go back to your home country and you need to tell everybody about your new beliefs. No. That is not what Elisha said. That's not what Elisha said. Elisha just said to Naaman, go in peace. And when you read that in its context, what you realize he's saying to Naaman, You can keep that newfound conviction. You can keep it in here. You don't have to go back and get yourself killed and your whole family just be jeopardized. Like, God is not going to destroy you because your external world is not compatible with this new belief in your heart. And so I remember being at my church and reading that story and feeling this peace from God of like, okay, for now at least, I don't have to be shouting about my new beliefs and new convictions and put my entire family in jeopardy. Since then, I have mixed feelings on that story, mixed feelings on that season of my life. I don't know what to do with that right now in my life. There's a part of me that looks back and says that made sense for that season of my life. Eventually, I think if there is a name and effect, as I call it, I don't think it can last very long, because I don't think we are, as humans, intended to live that disintegrated between our internal worlds and our external reality. That eventually is going to catch up with us. So if anything, I think it's just, for me, I think it's a grace by God to say this stuff is complicated. It's really hard. It's like God, it's as though God's saying, I don't expect you to get it right, because I don't even know if there is a right on this. When's the right time to, tell your church that you've changed your mind on this? I don't know. I know a lot of people who look back on their life and they're like, I waited too long. I should have been a safer place sooner in my life for the people. And other people are like, you know what, I probably blew the lid on that too soon and caused a lot of unnecessary chaos and damage along the way. So I don't really know that there's a perfect timing on this. I wonder if, regardless of how we handle it, God's like, yeah, you're doing great. This is hard. This is hard. So I'm working at this church. I'm keeping these newfound convictions, because it wasn't just that Jenga block on homosexuality in the Bible. At that point, I had taken out, hell as eternal conscious torment, and I'd be like, that block sucks. Get rid of that. Sorry, I didn't run any of these by Kate, so I don't know what minds I might be stepping on here. But I'll just stop there. I had other blocks that I got rid of, and so, but most of these blocks I'm keeping in, or most of these changes I'm keeping inside. I said a minute ago that I don't think we're meant to live out of alignment for that long, and eventually it kind of comes to, a reckoning does come. And I think the reckoning for me came on September 21st, 2011, when at the time President Obama signed the repeal for Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And if you remember, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the prohibition against gays and lesbians serving in the military. And at the time, I had very little understanding of the world of politics. I still kind of do. It just stresses me out mostly. But I didn't really understand all the nuance and the implications of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. For me, it was like, oh, that was a discriminatory practice, and now we're doing away with it. That's great. That's good news. In the church that I worked at, we often talked about how there's no room in the kingdom of God for discrimination. So that night when the repeal happened, I did what all wise, grounded people do when they want to celebrate something that happens in the political world. I went to Facebook and I shared an article on my Facebook page about the repeal, and I put these 6 words: I'm glad this day finally came. I just thought I was saying, great, end of discriminatory practice. I didn't realize at the time that I was essentially signaling to my church, whoa, something's going on with Pastor Colby. Because evidently in that world, there's no celebration of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so I wake up the next morning, and you can imagine the kinds of comments on my Facebook page of, is our church now pro-homosexuality? Why is our pastor advocating for the gay agenda? The gay agenda. I've been an ally for like 15 years now, and I still have not got my copy of the gay agenda. So if you know, yes, I'm looking at you two. You've got one at home? Okay, great. The gay agenda. And so I get to work that morning, and my boss calls me in, and he says, Colby, you got to take that post down. My phone's been blowing up all night. People are freaking out. And I didn't want to, I think on some level I didn't want to be a disruption. And so I begrudgingly took the post down, thought that would be the end of it. but then found out 2 days later that there would be an emergency board meeting on Friday. Now, if you've ever been a part of a board, you know that the best word to go in front of board meeting, no, the best word is canceled, right? I mean, that is, yes. But the worst word is emergency. Nobody likes an emergency, especially if you're the reason for said emergency board meeting. And so going into that meeting Friday morning, I knew that it was going to be dealing with me and my thoughts on homosexuality in the Bible. And so I spent all day Thursday typing out a letter because I knew that I was done living out of alignment with my internal convictions and my external reality. And I knew that the next morning when the topic came up, because I knew it would, I knew that I was time to be honest with myself and honest with the leaders of the church where I thought on the thing. And so I show up the next morning, and I get to the board meeting, and in a room full of 8 men, which I didn't need to tell you that detail. I told you it was an evangelical megachurch, so of course it was men. So a room of 8 men, and right out the gate, the chair of the board says, "Colby, we need to know your thoughts on homosexuality and gay marriage." And so I pulled out my backpack and I printed off 10 copies of this 10-page letter. I basically killed a small bush in this effort to come out of the theological closet, and I passed around the letters and I read through it with the men. And I shared with them some of my findings on the clobber passages, and ultimately I tried to appeal to like where we agreed, the Venn diagram of Colby's thoughts and the church's thoughts. Like, isn't there enough guys where we can still do ministry together? I've been here serving faithfully for 5 years. Like, this is my home. It's my family's home. And at the end of the meeting, they said, "Okay, take the weekend off. We'll find somebody to fill your spot on Sunday while we think about this." So I didn't go to church that Sunday. And then the very next morning when I get to the office, I'm handed a letter of termination effective immediately. Which meant I never saw my church again at that point. And so that for me was really the final moment of my faith quake. So if leading up to that were these series of gradual tremors as I'm auditing my faith in these various ways, being fired over the topic of LGBTQ inclusion, that was the Richter scale size quake that finally broke any association that I had with former versions of myself. I said goodbye to the religious world that I knew, or maybe that world said goodbye to me. I don't know, a little bit of both. I said goodbye to the infrastructure that I knew, the leaders that I had served with and trusted, the beliefs that I once held dear. But then in the place of that destruction, the rubble of the old, is where I began to find the gifts of the rebuilding process. And for me, that was a process of beginning to build out what I, at the time, would talk about as a progressive Christianity. So can I see that book right there? Yeah. So in the subsequent years after getting fired from that church, we ended up moving to San Diego, and through a series of events, and if you've read on Clobber, you know this story a bit. My at the time, wife, we started a church in San Diego. We ran that for 9 years. We ended up closing it in October of 2022, which might be news to some of you. If you read on Clobber, you're like, "Hey, how's Sojourn Grace Collective doing?" Well, we tried to come back after COVID, and the church didn't really have any life left, and it would have involved almost starting over. And at that point, after 20 years of ministry, full-time ministry for me, I didn't know that I had the energy to start over at that point. And so we closed the church in October 2022. But during that time, I started to rebuild what I, at the time, would call kind of progressive Christianity. During that time is when I wrote the book on Clobber, which tells a bit of the story that I told you now, as well as it goes into each of the Clobber passages and shows how you don't have to dismiss them, nor do you have to accept the traditional teaching, but you can go right through the heart of these suckers and put them in their original context and use the original language and discover that they do not teach or do not say what they've been misused to have been said in the past. So Unclobber came out, and then a few years after that, I wrote the book called The Shift. The subtitle is Surviving and Thriving After Moving from Conservative to Progressive Christianity. So this is like a survival guide for What do you do when the versions of Christianity that used to be more conservative, it doesn't really fit for you anymore, but you know that you still want to stay connected to the tradition of Christianity because Jesus still means something to you. But you know it has to be in a more open, expansive, inclusive way. Like, what does that look like? What do you do with God? What do you do with the Bible? What do you do with church? What do you do with the people in your life who feel like you've gone off the deep end or you've slidden down the slippery slope? Like, what do you do with your family who's freaking out about that? So that's a little bit of what the shift is about. And then for the last 3 years, again, all of this is leading to where I'm at right here. For the last 3 years, since we closed our church 3 years ago, I have been traveling the country. I added up the other day, I think in the last 3 years, I've been to just over 100 churches and organizations over the country in the last 3 years. Sometimes guest preaching like I did this morning, sometimes doing 5-hour unclobber workshops where people will give up their entire Saturdays to come and dive into this material. Sometimes giving talks on either one or both of my books. But really it's been this 3-year effort to advocate for better beliefs leading to better churches. Because I really believe that we have a problem in many of our churches right now. Did you know that less than 10% of churches in America, less than 10% of churches in America are LGBTQ affirming? Less than 10%. Yeah, you're not surprised, yeah. Like, we have a long way to go still. Now, we've come a long way. If you go back in time 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, like, that number is significantly smaller. So I always want to make sure that as progressives, we're not so forward-facing and angsty with where we're not, that we don't occasionally turn around and be like, wow, look at the ground we've covered. This is amazing. But we've got a lot more work to do ahead of us. And so for the past 3 years, I've been advocating for better beliefs leading to better churches, and I've been helping to train and teach lay people and staff this work. And by the way, quick side note, one of the ways that I've been able to do this is because I've been supported by people kind of in the old school missionary format. I don't know if your church supports missionaries or if you remember that, but so I have a group of people who believe in this work and believe in my ministry and independently support me so that I can occasionally take opportunities to go to churches that don't have the resources. Because a lot of times the churches that need some of this assistance the most are the ones that are the least resourced. And so they can't afford to fly me out and to pay for a whole day of workshop. But I love to be able to tell to them or say to them, it's okay, I'm supported independently by people who believe in this work, in this ministry, that we can either reduce or eliminate the cost altogether.
I wish we would have known that.
Don't listen.
Thank you.
Don't be cheap.
Yeah. I love you, Greg. Thank you for that. If you didn't hear in the back, Greg made a joke that shall not be repeated, but no. So that's part of why I'm here. And by the way, if that interests you at all, if that's something you believe in and want to support as well, at my table out there, in addition to the books I have for sale, there's also a sign with a QR code that will take you to my website where you can learn more about how to support me and support this work and support this ministry. So that all brings me to this moment where my position, as I said at the top, is that it is not an oxymoron to be an affirming Christian, but actually being inclusive and affirming LGBTQ people as a Christian just makes sense. And if this was a longer workshop or had more time, and if you didn't just go through Unclobber, then I would go through some of the Clobber passages to show how we've gotten that wrong. We're not going to do that right now. If that disappoints you, grab a copy of Unclobber on the way out, and you'll get most of what I would have shared with you today anyway. So the Bible does not say what we've been told. But the thing I will say about that is this. As far as the Bible condemning homosexuality, I just want to clear this up. As far as the Bible condemning homosexuality, I need you to hear me to say that that claim is obviously and undeniably false. And here's why. Because homosexuality is it's a really modern term and a really modern concept. Homosexuality is just a way to describe, it's a very modern term that describes what we've come to call as sexual orientation. And sexual orientation is a way to say that through some cocktail of nature and nurture, we really don't know, and maybe we'll never know, through some cocktail of nature and nurture, we all have innate desires and attractions toward fill in the blank. Statistically, most people feel that innate desire towards members of the opposite sex. But there has always been a portion of people that have felt that innate attraction, desire towards members of the same sex or either sex. Like genitalia really doesn't matter to them. It's not a part of the equation for them. And so sexual orientation is a term that was developed fairly recently as a way to put language around this. And so homosexuality is just saying, look, there's a portion of our population whose innate desires and attractions are for members of the same sex. It's an orientation. The reason why I say the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality is because the Bible doesn't address sexual orientation. This is a modern concept that did not exist 200 years ago, let alone 2,000 years ago. It would be like saying, what does the Bible have to say about the morality of investing in crypto? Nothing. Nothing. We need to make sure that we're not taking modern questions and asking an ancient text to answer them for us. So when it comes to the claim of homosexuality in the Bible, the Bible doesn't address sexual orientation at all. When it comes to the clobber passages, what you're talking about is not orientation. What you're talking about is particular sex acts between members of the same sex. And so in the book on clobber and in the work that I do, I go to show how even those passages do not say what we've always been told that they said. So you've got sexual orientation is not talked about in the Bible. You've got the clobber passages do not condemn any and all same-sex sex acts and does not prohibit same-sex marriage, which, by the way, I'm working on book number 3 right now, should come out either fall of 26 or spring of 27, and it's going to be a follow-up to on clobber, because for many people, the clobber passages, that's all they need. They're like, cool, I get it. I'm affirming now. Like that was the last hurdle I needed. But for other people, they have more questions. But what about Adam and Eve? But what about God made them male and female? But what about biblical marriage? But what about the stories of people who say they used to be gay and then they went through some conversion experience and now they're no longer gay? And so this book is to address some of those but what abouts that are beyond the clobber passages. So I'll get back to you soon when that's ready for pre-order. But anyway, tentatively titled But What About? Entitled what? But What About? But What About? Yeah. And that'll, come into a theater near you. So then how I want to wrap this up, because I do want to then engage with any questions or thoughts you might have, is if the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality, and if the Bible doesn't condemn any and all same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage, is there something that we can positively get from the Bible? And that's what I want to say, yes. And briefly what I'll say is that you see this trajectory through Scripture that begins in the very beginning. You've got, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and without void, and God spoke into the darkness and said, let there be light. And there was light, and God called it good. And it was years ago that I asked the question, what's so good about light? What's so good about light? And I know that might sound obvious and like a dumb question, but it can't just be that light's good because it lets you see. So light's good and dark's bad, because you are just as blind in pure light as you are in pure darkness. So it's not just that light is good and dark is bad. Besides, I think we've seen as a country what happens when you start thinking about lightness being goodness and darkness being badness. So it can't just be light is good because light is good and dark is bad. What if the reason why the introduction of light into darkness is good is because when you have a combination of the two, then you get contrast, distinction. Then you can see what previously you could not see. That's interesting. And then you fast forward a few chapters, you get to Genesis 11, you got the Tower of Babel, and you've got this story where the storyteller says all of the nations spoke one language, and they all came together and they said, let's build a tower for ourselves. Let's make a name for ourselves and build a tower so we can be like the gods. And God looks at this and says, uh-oh, they might actually pull this off. And if they do pull this off, this isn't going to be good for them. Now, if you're like me, you grew up hearing the Tower of Babel as being a story about God, about it being human pride, like humans wanting to be like God. And so what, God has this fragile ego? Like, no, only I can be God. Like, what is this? Like, and so this story has nothing to do about the fragile ego of God. I think this story has to do with God seeing humanity on this path of sameness, where everybody looks the same, talks the same, thinks the same. And God looks at that and says, I know where that path leads, and it's not good. And so you have this dispersing into all of the world, and this introduction of multiple languages and cultures as a way to introduce distinction and contrast into a path of sameness. Are you with me? Okay, so then you go to one more story in Acts chapter 2, and this is the story of Pentecost. And Pentecost is the story of the beginning of the birthing of the church. And in many ways, you could look at this as like the disciples and the followers of Jesus were huddled around in a room trying to figure out, well, now what do we do? Because we had a leader, we lost a leader, we got the leader back, that was fun. And then like 40 days later, he floated away in the clouds, not fun. So now we're all alone again, what do we do? And you have this moment in Acts chapter 2 where they're praying, and if you remember the story, the author writes, like the Spirit began to descend or show up, and it was like tongues of fire were alighting on people's heads, which is just a glorious way to say, who knows what was happening? Like, let's just try to describe it as best as we can. But the effect of that was that all the people outside, they started to gather around this event, and they're like, well, wait a minute, we know everybody in there is from Galilee. They all speak the same language. Well, then why do I hear it in my tongue? No, I hear it in my tongue. No, they're talking in my language, and everybody heard it in their own language. And I often wonder if this is the moment when the church is getting birthed, and the Spirit of God, she looks at this and she says, you know what we're not going to do? We're not going to do one more institution, one more human organization where everybody looks the same, thinks the same, talks the same. Not on my watch. And it's like the Spirit of God from the get-go, she just says, nope, we're doing this differently. Sometimes I'll call this like the queering of the church. Like from the get-go, it's going to be different. And so I look at these stories, and I can't help but see this trajectory in Scripture where there seems to be a divine preference for diversity. Yeah. There seems to be, that is applaud-worthy, yes. There seems to be, from beginning to end, a divine preference for diversity. That when you are on a path towards uniformity, conformity, where everybody has to look the same, think the same, talk the same, that's the path of empire. That's stormtroopers, right? We know what that path looks like, and it's not good. But when you're on the path of diversity, and plurality, and harmony, like now we're on the path where the kingdom of God is being made manifest on earth as it is in heaven. So this is why when I look at what the Bible doesn't say, and I look at what the Bible does say, and then I've got this whole thing about what it means to be Christian, which I'm just going to summarize by saying, when you look at the question of what does it mean to be a Christian, you can think of that in two ways. You can think of it in the noun sense, what does it mean to be a Christian? Or you can think about it in the verb sense, what does it mean to be Christian? And I think the church has gotten far too wrapped up in what it means to be a Christian. And they've attached beliefs and sacraments to that. And they're like, you have to jump through all the right hoops so that you can have an identity of a Christian. And I'm just not convinced that was maybe the original intent of whatever this movement Jesus started. Because the original followers of Jesus in the book of Acts, remember what they were called? Followers of the way. They weren't called acquiescers of doctrinal truths. People noticed that they were different because of how they lived, how they acted, how they loved and cared for one another. They were followers. They actually did differently. Somewhere along the way, Christianity turned in from a movement from love your neighbor as yourself and love your enemy into believe the right things. And I think we've gotten off track. So I'm far less interested in what does it mean to be a Christian. We've got 40,000 denominations who've answered that independently of each other. Pick one. I mean, Lutherans are the best. Maybe not. I'm far more interested in what does it mean to be Christian? How can we live a life that reflects who Jesus was, what mattered to Jesus, what he taught? How do we live a life that is about mercy and compassion and kindness and grace and forgiveness? For me, I care more about what it means to be Christian. And so where does that leave us? I think when you consider that there's no justification from the Bible to think that being gay is a sin or that two people of the same sex can't have a loving, committed relationship that God blesses and smiles upon just like us straight folk. When you consider that woven all throughout the narrative of the Bible is this ever-expanding mercy of God opting over and over again for diversity and inclusion. And when you consider that being Christian means that someone is doing their best to follow in the ways of Jesus, then not only do I not see a contradiction between being Christian and affirming LGBTQ people, but I believe that such a posture just makes sense. Yeah? Okay. That was about an hour right on the nose. And so I think normally you're used to going an hour. So maybe I'll say this. If you have somewhere to go or you needed to leave right at 11:30, please feel free to. And there's no offense, right? You did your hour. You did church twice today. Good job. But otherwise, I'd love to open it up for some questions and some interaction if you'd like. So wait, who is the lovely young man passing microphones around? Norm? Thank you, Norm, for doing that job. That's amazing. Okay. Are the microphones on? Is that on? Will you test that mic?
I know.
Yes, great.
I know when I stand up, everybody cringes. Okay? I don't get 2 minutes. This time I got this. Okay, I've got a question at the end. But in the reading today, it was that if you did bad things, God would do bad things to you. If you did good things, God would do good things for you. Did that happen? Absolutely not. Those bad people, and it's still happening today, in that, God isn't punishing those bad people. There was a big movement and a book and all these things on why do bad things happen to good people. Ties it in, okay? Right now, I think most of us are in the mindset that God will save everyone. He's a very honest, loving God that will save everyone. Okay? Now I'm glad at the end of I love your talk. I loved your talk.
Way to bury the lead.
What?
I'm teasing. Keep going.
But I loved what, at the end where you really put the Jesus factor into it. Because I'm not such a God person, but I am a Jesus person. I always have been. My question is, from the time of the reading that we had today to today, has God changed, or have we changed God?
Yeah, what's your name?
My name?
Yeah.
Joe.
Joe. Remember at the beginning, Joe, when I said I can respond to every question? But I may not have an answer? This is definitely one of those. So I don't have an answer for that.
I just wanted
Go ahead.
to kind of throw that out
Yeah.
to people, because just hearing that passage today, which was on way over on this side, and then where we are today is in a whole different place. I mean, we are at least in this church.
Yeah.
We are in a whole different place. And I just want people to think about that, because where's God?
Yeah.
I mean, where is and
So in my Baptist training, we were trained in the art of dispensational thinking, which is that like there's different dispensations in which God basically functioned differently towards humanity, and that was their way of attempting to try to square that circle of being like, why does the Old Testament God seem so different than Jesus? So I can understand and appreciate the attempts to try to make sense of that. And there's been a lot of explanations given to make, like what we read this morning in Leviticus, make that still be true of God. Really, for me, part of what that comes down to is it comes down to a view of Scripture which is incredibly flat. And a flat view which says that every single thing in it is just as equally true and important as everything else. Rather than seeing the Bible as this ongoing conversation with itself, a progressive revelation and understanding. Like you see, like for instance, it's pretty obvious to me that the earliest Israelites were polytheists just like everybody else in the ancient world. It was just assumed in the ancient world there were multiple gods. This is why I think the Ten Commandments are worded such as, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." What's the implication? There's other gods, put me first. And so you see this evolution, even in the Hebrew people, from a polytheistic, because everybody thought that way, to then a monotheistic of, wait, we actually think there's only one God. And so it no longer is a problem for me to run into kinds of Old Testament texts that illustrate a God that for me is very different than the author of Hebrews, who says that in Jesus we see the express image of God, the exact representation. So I think if it doesn't look like Jesus, then we're probably not quite there yet when it comes to who God is. And so no, I don't think God changed. I think humans' understanding of God has been and will continue to be evolving. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we've arrived. I'm not confident / arrogant enough to be like, all right, this version of Colby at 43, I've now got it figured out. So now I could just lock in these beliefs and I've got it figured out from here. Not a chance am I doing that. So no, I don't think God has changed. I often think about, I got this from Brian McLaren years ago. You know how when you are if you can remember back to when you were in grade school, or if you have grade schoolers in your life, when you're in second grade and you do math, your teacher's teaching you that you cannot subtract a larger number from a smaller number. Can't do it. As a second grader, you're like, that makes sense, because once you get to 0, there's nothing. And then you get to 4th grade and you learn about negative numbers. Wait, was Mrs. O'Brien lying to me? Was she lying to me? And then you get to 6th grade and you learn about algebra, letters. So it's like, no, the early teachers weren't lying to you. They were meeting you where you were at with your understanding that made sense to you and gave you a model that could fit within your construct and your consciousness. I think to whatever degree the ancient Israelites received a kind of divine revelation, it was God meeting them where they were at with the level of consciousness they had, and maybe clicking them forward just a little bit. This is why in Leviticus, amidst all these other sort of odd things, you also have this, thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself. Eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That was a progressive teaching, because in the ancient world, if you kill my cow, I'm going to kill 10 of your cows. If you kill 10 of my cows, I'm going to return back and burn your whole home down. And so you have this escalation of violence. And so now you have the Hebrew people like, what if we just have like equal? Like, you do that wrong to me, I return the favor and we're good, right? Like that was a step forward. And so I just think you see this, and then by the time you get to Jesus, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. Subtext being, that was pretty good for like a couple hundred years, right? Let's take it even further. But I say to you, what if when someone strikes you on the right cheek, you turn to them the left also? And so you see this click forward. So no, I don't think it's God changing. I think it's a constant ongoing our attempts to understand ourselves in the divine. Great question. Thank you, Joe. There was over here.
Just a statement to say, first, thank you. A lot of people know my story, but the quick summation, I grew up in the same type of environment, was taught to proselytize is what we called it, and I was going to seminary school. I asked questions and was told, no, those aren't welcoming. These are not the right questions. I left the church, went into Buddhism, did all these things, because I couldn't understand how my Jesus, and I really like how we separated the God and Jesus kind of thing. For me, listening to those beliefs, I went to the extreme because of how I was raised, and I believed in Leviticus, so a lot of you guys know, I grew dreads for 16 years. Don't apply a razor to thy head or thy beard. I mean, that's part of what Leviticus was. Yeah. And then I was volunteering to teach Sunday school, and I was coming from the clubs. I was a rave DJ, and I would leave the club and come straight to church with 3 hours of sleep in my Jenko jeans and my dreads to my butt. And people in the church were like...
Photos or it didn't happen. I want to see photos.
Oh, they're on Facebook. And then people in my Episcopal church were like, why is she allowed to wear that? Look at her hair, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I'm volunteering. Are you? Do you want to step up here at 8 o'clock in the morning and teach kids? And I left the church. I was being judged, all the things that Jesus said not to do. And I said, if we're following the same book and the same person, I don't understand this. And I'm a teacher. Most people here know this. And my place is the welcoming space. I teach choir, I teach theater, and I think it's symbiotic. We need to be, this is who we are supposed to be. This is what the book talks about. So it's so affirming. Thank you for coming, writing a book, and explaining to people who don't understand. I'm sending my mom that book for Christmas because she's still a very right-wing conservative. That's how she feels. I was raised one way, and then we moved to this country, and then for some reason she took out of the church experience that not the way that she raised me. Now everyone's going to hell. All the people, Muslims, Jews, gay, everybody. And I don't believe that. It's I just thank you over and over for that. And to have these books, to have these talks, and thanks for going around the country, because a lot of people, as we know, you said 10%, that really shocked me. Because in my world, it's more like 90% believe and 10 don't. Yeah. But I know I live in a minority, obviously. But I just thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you.
Oh, okay. My question is, and first of all, I want to go back to Campus Crusades for Christ. When they approached me, do you know where you're going? I said, no, but do you? As if they had the real secret knowledge, because we know pieces of the Bible say you don't know. Mm-hmm. Anyway, my question is, why do certain people of strong belief have to hammer in on such few little selections or tidbits when there are so many tidbits that are totally nonsensical too, but they don't latch on to those kind of things? Yeah. Why can't they see it like a food court, that everybody goes into the food court and selects the meal they want and doesn't hover over the table and say, you're not selecting right?
Yeah, great question. I got two thoughts on that. First, real quickly, on the topic of why there seems to be this overemphasis, this disproportionate angst from so many Christians towards particularly the topic of homosexuality, or now we're seeing it in transgender topics. Like why is that so radically so important to them? I think there's a lot that could be said there. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is just the church has never done well with sex and sexuality. Just never. We have not figured out for 2,000 years how to integrate a healthy sense of our bodies. Like, sex has always been this sort of icky, scary, repress, deny topic. And so when you have a group of people who, this is part of why I love going to pride parades and being in pride parades, because you see, oh, that's what it's like when you're comfortable in your body. Huh. By the way, that's why there's no straight parades. We wouldn't know how to be comfortable in our bodies. Are you kidding me? We'd be like, don't look at me. So I think the conservative, or a lot of Christians, they're not comfortable with their own sexuality, their own body. We haven't known how to do that as a church. And so seeing anyone else that has a kind of empowerment or embodiment, that threatens our sense of insecurity. And if I can't feel free in myself, then neither can you. I mean, it's just that classic projection, Rene Girard, scapegoating, all of that stuff. So I think that's part of why that's like one of the things they focus on. But then the second thought is to go beyond that, which is, and we were talking about this last night at dinner, at dinner with some of the tunnel trash. Do you know this term, tunnel trash? Okay. Last night at dinner, it was brought up that there might be some who live in this part of Colorado that view some who live more in the Denver part that come and visit this. I guess there's a phrase called tunnel trash, and that came up last night as sort of a playful way to describe, several friends who came from the other side of the tunnel, yes, to be a part of us. So. Anyway, that didn't go over as well as I thought it would, but so we were talking about this last night, how, as I said a minute ago, Christianity morphs into this believe the right things. And so what has happened is we have created conditions in which we feel we have to believe the correct 1, 2, 3, I don't know, pick your denomination, they'll tell you what the essentials are. You have to believe those things in order to be okay with God. And if you don't believe those right things, you are now not okay with God. When that is your foundation, and it is the foundation for, I would argue, most of Christianity, you got to believe the right things to be okay with God. When that is your foundation, anything that threatens your very sense of eternal existential well-being. And that is understandably scary. We don't want to address the central core things, so what we do is we build like a hedge of protection around some of the other minor non-essential things, and we're like, look, I'm not even going to let you penetrate through those. So I'm not even going to be open to these secondary non-essential topics, because if you can pierce through that, then it gets that much closer to some of the central things, and I can't handle the thought of letting go of those, because if I let go of any of those, I'm dead. And that is terrifying. And I see some heads nodding because I think many of us know we used to feel that way too. And some of us still, in our very bones, still feel like, even though up here, we've distanced ourselves from that kind of thinking, in our bodies, we're still like, we lay down at bed some nights, and we're like, okay, but am I going to hell? Like, is that possible? No, that's not a real thing. Then why do I still get scared sometimes? Well, it's because of this. And so I think part of the getting hung up on the tidbit is because that builds a protection around, if I can keep you out here, then I don't have to get to the real heart of the thing that scares me most. Yeah, we got a couple over here. Did the microphones make their way over here? Yeah, thank you.
She told me not to use this. I just have a real...
Hold on, I think right behind you.
Hello, it works. Is it working? Okay, Colby.
You're next.
I was touched by your description of your integration of head and heart. And I'm wondering, in addition to that, it sounds like a marvelous thing to learn, what other big learning has come to you through your very interesting, fascinating journey?
Wow. Where to start?
I'll go after you.
Pick only one.
Yeah, I'll pick one. I'll pick this one because it's kind of on brand for what I've been saying here, which is the idea of having to believe the right things. And it actually ties into my sermon from earlier, because I briefly touched on the prodigal son. But the reason why I think the prodigal son is one of my favorite stories in all of the Gospels is because I mentioned the young son. We all know the young son goes off and squanders all of his resources. But then there's also the part of the older son. And you remember the older son who begrudgingly doesn't go to the party because the older son, in his mind, did everything right. He did believe the right things, right? He stayed home and kept the family name and kept the family business. And so when dad goes to say, son, why aren't you at the party? his response is, Dad, I'm the good one. I stayed. I did everything right. And like, you've never even given me like so much as a goat for me and my friends to have a barbecue. And then my younger brother goes off and wastes everything, and you want me to party with him on that? And I get the sense, if you've ever been a parent before, you know that pain where sometimes you can try to tell your kids something over and over and over and over again, but for reasons that are not entirely clear, the message never lands. And I get the sense that this father has probably communicated to his son over and over again, hey, bud, you want a goat? Take a goat. Like, this is what I sense, because the father's response is, bud, everything I have has always been yours. And you hear the grief in the father's heart. So my point in this, and where it comes back to your question, is I love this story because both of these sons fundamentally failed to understand the love of their father on the basis of deserving. The younger son thought he didn't deserve his dad's love. The older son thought he did deserve his dad's love. And they're both incorrect, because when it comes to the love of God, deserving has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. And so another massive shift in my life is when I was able to sink into that place of, oh, I'm a loved child of God just because I am. Just because I exist. The fact that the fact that I am alive, I have a birthright as a child of God. That's not something I can ever earn or lose. That is the ultimate gift. That is the ultimate grace. And being able to sink into that place, now I don't have to try to extract love from other people, because when you fundamentally feel like you have to earn your place in the universe, when you have to be good enough to be loved by God, well, then you feel like you got to be good enough for everybody else. And you're constantly like, love me, love me, love me, love me. I need to do the right thing so you like me, be my friend. I want to make sure that you think that I'm great. I mean, we're like vampirically sucking the lifeblood out of everybody. When you can sink into the place of, oh, I'm loved. Now it's like, hey, if you love me, that's great. If you don't, also great, because I got eternal love, like flowing. So much so that I'm going to give some away today. You can be like Oprah, you get some love, and you get some love, and you get some love. And that shift is huge. That's everything. Yeah. Okay, right here in front, yeah.
I just had so is this on?
It is, yeah.
A very quick question. When you talk about the percent of places that are affirming or not affirming, is that within the United States?
Yes, great question. That is solely, so the question when I said less than 10% of churches, that is in America. That number is going to get even smaller when you go globally, because the global south is just decades behind culturally on this topic, and then in the church is far more conservative as well. So that number is just for America, and that number includes evangelical church, because when you talk evangelical churches, 0% of evangelical churches are affirming, essentially, because once a church becomes affirming, the evangelical group's like, and we're done with you. So that number is like a composite number, bringing in all of the non-affirming evangelicals, and then a ton of the affirming, Lutherans and Presbyterians and Episcopals and Church of Christ and Disciples of Christ. Like some of these denominations have lots of affirming streams in them. But that is just for America. Yeah. Yes, right here.
I work in a hospital as a hospital chaplain. Okay. And I will walk into a room and say, hi, I'm Karen, the chaplain. And at least half the time, people will say, no, I don't believe any of that crap. And, and on their intake, it says Baptist or Methodist. And yet that's the response I'm getting. And I always say, I hear you. Yeah. My faith in God is deep and strong. My faith in organized religion right now is in the toilet. Yeah. And it breaks my heart to watch what other Christians believe they're saying and doing is Christ-like. Yeah. Can we be saved? Can we turn this around? I'm grateful that you're going out and speaking to churches and teaching and hopefully making inroads on this. But I go home thinking, can we pull this out? Can this be turned around? What are your thoughts on it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh yeah. No, I'm almost obnoxiously optimistic about this. For a couple reasons. One, and I said it a minute ago, if we just pause and look at how far we've come. Yeah, you're great. If we look at how far we've come, like that's not nothing. And that sets a trajectory. That's turning of the Titanic, probably a bad metaphor because we know what happened there, but turning of a large cruise ship takes a really long time. But once you get just enough momentum, like the thing is going to go. And I do feel like the last 10, 20, 30 years, again, specifically in America, of the changing away from a fear-based, control-based religion as being the dominant strain, that has been happening. And I don't feel like that's going to stop. I feel like that's only going to continue. Now, you're saying, well, how does that make sense with what we've seen in the news and in culture and just what's happening in our country, right? I'm not trying to gaslight you to say that's not happening. There's a phenomena called an extinction burst, and people in evolutionary biology as well as in behaviorism, they will talk about extinction bursts. Thank you, Tracy. And extinction bursts are a way to describe when a species is on its decline, going out, that you see this last ditch effort to try to survive, this last grasp to stick around, this burst of activity before it sort of drops off. I have a suspicion that we'll look back on this time in our culture and our society as a kind of extinction burst moment for this hyper-conservative, fundamental kind of religion. I think this is short-lived. And I hope so too, Ron. So I feel that the ship has been turning. It's not going to stop. This moment is an extinction burst. And at the end of the day, love wins. I just don't see any story other than love winning. And I think we have to, as much as we can, allow a long-term vision to be the thing that we fall back into trust in. We may not see it in our time. Sweet Moses didn't get to see the promised land in his time. But that didn't stop him from working tirelessly to prepare the people of God for the land. So if you need just a mustard seed of faith this morning that we're going to be okay and that things are we're going to get there, then I give you a mustard seed because I got lots of seeds in this particular topic. And I've seen it. The traveling has given me, you right here have given me 17 more seeds to put in my pocket to be we're going to be all right. Because let me tell you about Lord of the Mountain Church in Dillon, Colorado. We're going to be all right. We're going to be all right. Yeah.
Now we're on. So one more question in the official time. So we're going to have Brian ask his question. Colby will have you respond. And then whatever other conversation wants to happen after, totally cool. That's between Colby and whoever. Yeah. But just one more, and then we'll wrap up.
Great. And then I'll head back to the table, and if y'all want to greet me on the way out, that'd be great as well. So,
okay.
Thank you, Kate.
It's working? Colby, it's fantastic having you here.
Thank you.
Really awesome.
Thank you.
I'm coming at this from a little different angle. I'm interested in courage. Over 50 years ago, my wife and I'm a professional violinist. My wife at that time was teaching French and Russian, and we were employed at a private school in the Midwest, the name I will not mention. At the end of the first year, the oboist was fired, totally unfairly. There was no tenure in this situation, in this school. And my wife and I were outraged as to what had happened. And we took the oboist and his wife into our house. The oboist had been living on campus, as we were, and so he not only lost his job, but he had to get off the campus. my wife and I took him in. We realized the president could fire us too. We took that chance. It was scary, but we were young, and we had no children. And I've often asked myself, particularly since I've read your book, I think your fourth child was on the way when you had the courage to do what you did. And I wouldn't have had the courage to do that. And I commend you for it. And I'm asking you how you had the guts to do it when you had 4 young kids.
I don't know. I don't know. I think Paul was right when he said, when I am at my weakest and Christ is at his strongest. When we come to the end of ourselves, it's like that's when the magic begins. That's when God's like, oh, that's a life I can do something with now. I think I had lived at that point long enough disintegrated between my internal convictions and my external reality that to continue going in that direction not only would have been a betrayal to the me that was growing inside of me, but it would have been a betrayal to what I said I stood for. And I don't know that, it didn't feel like a choice to me. It didn't feel like a choice to me. And I hear you saying that you don't think you would have made the same choice. I don't know about that. Maybe you would have. Maybe any of us would have.
I just don't think since I've read your book, I don't think I would have had the courage to do what you did. I'm a bit ashamed of myself about it, I wish, to be honest.
It didn't feel like courage to me. I'm grateful for the description now. At the time, it felt like this is really this is really my only option, and I don't know. So that's why I go back to my big answer is I don't know. I don't know how I did it. It wasn't me. It was Christ through me.
Perhaps it was your strong faith.
What's that?
Perhaps it was your strong faith in
No.
Jesus. No.
No. I don't. Maybe. I mean, again, I appreciate that, but that would give me far too much credit.
I was not a Christian at the time,
Yeah.
so I didn't have any faith. I did it without faith.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have done it with 4 young kids.
Thank you.
I don't want to
Thank
put
you.
words in your mouth, Colby, but I've done and said things in my life that I can only attribute to the Spirit through me later. Even just, it's like I have no recollection of why I said yes when I said yes, you know? So I think sometimes we aren't the ones actually saying the word. We just do it, and it's God through us. But I don't know.
I think if it would have been God, it probably wouldn't have been a 10-page letter that I wrote out. I'm a little verbose. My life motto is, why use 10 words when 50 will do? But yeah, I suspect that it's got to be something like that. Some combination of enough faith, enough openness. Isaiah, here I am, send me. Like enough. It wasn't a mustard seed is all I probably had at that point, mixed with God saying, "Cool, I'll take it from here." Like Spirit, like, don't worry, I got this. We can do this. So yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Kate.